Today, Jesus is the face of a religion that is followed by 2 billion people. Even for those who don't worship him, he's very recognizable. But are we sure we know what he looked like? The Gospels aren't much help.
There isn't a word about Jesus' appearance. So it's surprising that so many people think they know what Jesus looked like.
This bazaar in Jerusalem holds hundreds of portraits of Jesus.
The first icons were painted in the 6th century. That's 500 years after Jesus died. So how could the artists have known the color of his hair or the shape of his face? Well, there's a legend that the gospel writer Luke painted a portrait that was the inspiration for all the others. But that's just a legend. There must be a better way of finding out what Jesus looked like. This is one of Israel's leading departments of forensic science. These boxes are full of hundreds of human skulls and bones that were uncovered accidentally by archaeologists, by road builders, by all sorts of people here in the Holy Land. They'll be reburied once the experts have finished studying them. But until then, what's in these boxes can tell us a story that should get us closer to the face of Jesus.
Josias has found that the face in the icons corresponds to a type of skull not found in Israel. The face of Jesus would have been closer to these Jewish skulls. They were found in Jerusalem and they date to the 1st century.
If we look at the skulls here, these things, rather than being long-headed, which many of the skulls are, these things are very, very wide here in terms of the parietals, and they narrow over here. Sometimes these things are even almost round. Now, if we compare these types with other Eastern Mediterranean non-Jewish types, and if you look at this, notice how this is very long and this is very, very narrow. It's a complete different type. If we put particularly these next to each other, perhaps you can see clearly what I'm talking about. Again, we see how wide the one on my left hand is compared to this one over here on the right. This is much more gracile, much more fine, as compared to this one here. This one's much more robust, even in terms of weight.
Let me feel.
Racial differences, okay? It's tremendous.
Try not to drop them. Oh yeah, this is much heavier.
Much heavier, much more robust, much stronger vault.
We used the 1st century skull to get even closer to the face of the Jesus of history. Richard Nee from the Unit of Art in Medicine at the University of Manchester is one of the world's leading forensic artists. He's put faces on modern skulls for the police many times.
The basic face, the basic shape, the general configuration of the face is determined by the skull, and the face that will emerge from this reconstruction will be broadly similar to the kind of face that this man had when he was alive. This certainly doesn't look anything like the images that one associates with him, and I think it's much more likely to be an accurate reflection of the majority of people who would have been around at that time. It's very much the kind of face that you see in parts of the world today, in parts of North Africa and Egypt and around into parts of Jordan and Israel.
The face looks old before its time.
With an archaeological reconstruction, that is a fair thing to do for somebody who you know has probably been living in fairly hot climate with lots of bright sunshine, which does tend to make the brows become more furrowed and the skin more creased and wrinkled.
But this face still leaves many questions unanswered. What kind of hair, beard, and skin color did Jesus have? It was time for a makeover. First, the reconstructed face was scanned into a computer. The biblical scholar, Dr. Mark Goodacre, has discovered a number of historical clues which get us even closer to the likely face of Jesus. Look at these telling images from a Jewish synagogue in Syria. They were painted in the 3rd century, less than 200 years from the time of Jesus. They're the earliest pictures of Jewish people in the world, and fashions back then changed slowly.
The kind of hairstyle that you get, it's short, it's curly, it's, if you like, Afro in style, and this seems to be almost uniform in the way that Jesus is depicted there. Moreover, it's likely that Jesus would have had a short-cropped, kind of black sort of beard. Something a little bit like this.
The fact they liked short hair is confirmed by St. Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, composed barely 20 years after the time of Jesus. He writes that it's disgraceful for a man to have long hair.
Now, what's interesting about this is that St. Paul knew members of the family of Jesus, he knew the disciples of Jesus. It's unlikely that Paul would have been able to say something like this if it was well known that Jesus himself had long hair.
And Jesus lived in a part of the world where people have dark skin.
It's unlikely that Jesus' skin tones were white in the traditional, as you get it in much of the traditional art, as you get it in the Hollywood Jesuses. It's more likely had darker skin tones, and is much more likely to have looked something like this.
Of course, this is not the actual face of Jesus, but it takes us beyond the idealized images of the last 1,500 years and closer than ever before to what Jesus looked like. There is no doubt that a real flesh and blood man called Jesus of Nazareth challenged the Jewish establishment. But what should we make of his mission? On the face of it, he gambled and lost.